Gemar Tov. A number of years ago, while serving in my previous congregation, I had the opportunity to offer spiritual counseling and support to residents of a local inpatient mental health facility. Through my ongoing connections there, I was invited to a special symposium between the executive medical director of the institution and his good friend, Elie Wiesel. The title of the evening was Letting Go and Rising Up. The talk was intended for select mental health professionals, and I was fortunate to be gifted the opportunity to be present. After all, I was to be immersed in this larger-than-life messenger to humankind, soaking up his wisdom that was born of so much pain. I was enamored by the teachings of this survivor whose life sermon delivers endless iterations of the same themes: peace, atonement, and human dignity. The encounter that evening, as you can imagine, was powerful, as Wiesel shared a compelling story, which I later learned was penned as part of his 1965 autobiographical tale entitled One Generation After. He shared the story of his first and only return to his birth town, Siga, Transylvania. He spoke of receiving a beautiful gold watch as a bar mitzvah gift that he treasured dearly until a few years later when he turned 15 and the Nazis came, followed by the edicts, the ghettos, and the transports. Until those fateful hours just before Passover of 1944, when 10,000 Jews of Siget were sent to the camps. As the roundups began, Elie and his family began to dig feverishly into the ground, burying their family heirlooms, jewelry and candelabras and the like, hoping that one day they would have the opportunity to return and retrieve them. Wiesel's only possession of value was his bar mitzvah watch, and like the rest of his family, he chose to bury it beneath their poplar tree to be recovered one day. Elie returned to Siget 20 years after the Shoah with the hopes of retrieving his cherished watch. Unannounced and into the night, he retraced his footsteps and, using his bare hands, scratched and began to dig into the frozen earth. His fingers hit something hard and metallic, and he exhumed the box containing this relic from the past, the only remaining symbol of all that had been. He recalled the watch was rusty and covered with dirt, which didn't stop him from raising it to his lips. Elie hastily stuffs the watch into his pocket and runs out of the garden. He's halfway down the street when he stops dead in his tracks. He does an about-face, retraces his steps to that poplar tree in the garden, places the watch back in the box, then into the hole, and proceeds to fill up the hole with earth. Wiesel told us, since that day, the town of his childhood had ceased being just another town. It had become the face of the watch. Through the playful back and forth with his friend, the medical director, that unforgettable evening, Wiesel taught us to leverage that sacred obligation of memory and, where appropriate, lift its tortured, problematic anchor from the depths of darkness in order to rise up, to build a vital present and future. Tonight, on this Sabbath of Sabbaths, we pause everything, even eating and drinking, to sharpen our focus on authentic soul assessment. In that soul assessment, I'm so very aware and mindful of the many losses so many have confronted this past year. Those who lost dear friends and family, jobs or businesses. Those milestone moments that never came to be as originally planned, bar and bat mitzvahs, graduations, weddings, vacations, prom. Many of us experience the loss of normalcy, time when we intended to spend with our children and grandchildren, those first encounters with a new grandchild, the free-spirited joy of summer camp. What once seemed so simple, like going to the movies or a concert, leisurely indoor dining, worship services in the comfort of our own sanctuary, and perhaps most distressing for many of us, the loss of intangible moments of connection, being able to hold or hug those outside of our living pods. My grandfather, George, Zichrono Livracha, always reminded me that as Jews, we know loss. And our tradition offers narratives time and again that tell us those stories. Job, who experienced unspeakable loss and refused to renounce his faith. Jacob, who fought courageously with an angel to reconcile with his brother Esau. Joseph, cast into the pit by his siblings, imprisoned, sold into slavery, and left to be forgotten. As I reflected upon Wiesel's unforgettable teaching that evening and that of our biblical models, I was inspired to reach into our Beth Israel community to learn more about individuals who had reconstituted themselves after setback and loss, those who learned to rise up and to choose life. I asked a few of them to share how, in the midst of this time, they were able to let go and to rise up. I was grateful and moved by the courageous and soulful people I have the pleasure of introducing you to this evening. I met Deborah, a social worker in oncology who's married to Heidi. Deborah lovingly spoke about their daughter, Michaela. 3 years ago, Michaela met a man from India named Kishore, right here in California, and they fell in love. His visa expired. The couple married and planned to live in India in the short term so as to go through the appropriate U.S. visa process. The process was moving along favorably, and in the interim, the couple wedded in India this past January with family present, having the time of their lives, as Deborah fondly recalled. Upon the family's return, COVID hit. The U.S. Embassy closed ever since, and the newlyweds have been living in India through ongoing quarantine ever since. Deborah speaks of her increasing fear and anxiety, unclear of what the future will hold for Michaela and Kishore. Yet, she also noted that it was Michaela's resilience that served as powerful inspiration for Deborah. While still distanced from her family, Michaela teaches English virtually to children in China and dreams about her life when she returns to the States. She walks the roof in circles atop her apartment building in India for exercise. Her resilience has been so helpful to both Deborah and Heidi, teaching them to find hope and gratitude in the midst of the unknown. And Deborah has employed each of those tools regularly throughout the pandemic. I connected with longtime member Amy Mentier, who spoke with reverence of her mother Suki, also part of our Beth Israel community. These past years have been especially rich, living so close to one another. Suki died this past April in the early months of the pandemic, and the only way to gather for the funeral was via Zoom, with many family and friends at a distance. Having been through the loss of her father 5 years prior, she had experienced the power of community gathered for Shiva. Amy spoke of the profound challenge of losing someone during this time, the absence of physical love and embrace of family and friends. It was nowhere close to the same. That feeling of sacred closure never came to be, she painfully recalled. Yet, the rising up moments have been healing for her. Family has connected regularly and been virtually available to support one another. Over the past months, they have relived cherished stories, punctuated with memorable family photos. Those elements warmed our hearts, Amy noted. It became enough for us to get moving again. Sebastian Mayer, a junior of Franklin and Marshall, shared his experience. He said, "I don't know if I have lost anything permanently, but I feel disconnected from so many things. In the past few years, there has always been something to do, but now I just sit in my room. There's an element of adventure that had been wiped away. It is easy to sit in my dorm room and dwell on all the things that are wrong with this semester. But if you actually want to transcend loss, you cannot look at the world and everything you loved as lost. If you want to find the good and make meaning out of it, it's important to recognize how we can help others. Those moments have been some of the best since the pandemic. Running services for Hillel, working at the food pantry, teaching sports at Camp Sababa. If we show a little compassion, we can get through it together. Yesterday, my good friend who introduced me to a cappella sat with me and sang, and we played guitar for an hour, socially distanced. And then he and I and a friend had dinner together. Singing so intimately with another person for such a long time was a moment of peace. Those are the moments that get me through. Tonight, I want to offer what may be a new perspective on our Yom Kippur reflection and prayer. We've always been taught to set aside this day to seek forgiveness from others and from God. But what if we are called to do an even deeper task, to do something incredibly hard, to actualize lessons that Wiesel and others have taught us, to liberate ourselves from the incapacitating pain of having been hurt by loss, be it person or plague. If we are to actually work toward our best selves, we must recognize that our attachment to loss and to grief and to pain can hold us back. In order to rise up and transcend, we need to emancipate ourselves from the depths of our own despair. Again, our tradition brings guidance and offers texts that give us direction and purpose. When our souls face darkness, the book of Psalms offers words that encourage our hearts and capture the many emotions and struggles people endure. Psalm 23 in particular offers the familiar words, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." We've heard it prayed in movies, recited at funerals, found in popular songs, our Yom Kippur liturgy, often serving as a reframe of comfort we can all cling to in dark moments. I first heard Psalm 23 at my grandfather George's funeral when I was 17 years old. His death was my first experience with deep loss. I hadn't lived my life yet. I didn't know anything about falling in love and breaking up or a career. I hadn't yet gone to college or thought about what would come next. That calling to be a rabbi hadn't taken shape. I had not yet suffered the loss of losing family or friends or struggling on my own. I had not yet understood what God's presence would come to mean for me, my God, my shepherd. But I do remember absorbing the Psalms' imagination, and it offered me comfort born of my own pain, my own loss. In searching for commentary on Psalm 23, I stumbled upon a fascinating book by W. Philip Keller entitled, "A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23." Immediately drawn to the title, this book, which is actually wedded in Christian theology, explores the metaphor of the shepherd in a deep and rich way. Keller artfully explores the paramount of the shepherd in the lives of his or her sheep. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. A good shepherd takes his sheep to the best field. A flock that is restless, discontent, always agitated and disturbed never does well. And the same is true of people, he notes. He leads me beside the still waters. Just as the physical body has a capacity and need for water, so too the human personality and soul. Both have a need for the water of the human spirit to continue along the journey. He restores my soul. Sheep are so greedy. They just keep eating and eating, and as they fill up, they can literally fall down. And if a shepherd doesn't pick them up, they'll die. Even King David, the author attributed to this psalm, knew what it was to be cast down and dejected. He had tasted defeat in his life and felt the frustration of having fallen under temptation. David was acquainted with the bitterness of feeling hopeless and without strength in himself. In the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It's treacherous out there in the wilderness for the sheep, and the shepherd keeps them well. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Sometimes the shepherd is behind, herding, and sometimes the shepherd is up front, leading. A shepherd makes a good container for the sheep to feel safe. The truth is that so many of us have walked this year in the valley of the shadow. And Yom Kippur offers an annual invitation to revisit our own buried watch in the poplar tree, that problematic anchor of attachment to loss in our lives. There's a beautiful arc to the 25 hours of inward turning that we are beginning this evening. The haunting sounds of the Kol Nidrei prayer serves as a stirring prayer to annul those vows, those losses, both past and future, by letting go of that which never came to be. Tomorrow, we commit our morning and afternoon to reflecting deeply, facing the hard stuff, and even walking in our own personal valley of the shadow. As the sun sets on our day of tshuva, our turning, our repentance, we enter to Nila, our concluding service. The root of the word Nila is the same as that of Aliyah, to go up, to ascend. As the gates close, if we have been able to open ourselves to the guidance, the protection, comfort, and container of our own shepherd, we then have the capacity of choosing to let go of our loss and our pain, enough for each of us to rise up and to choose life. May it be that the invitation of this sacred day moves us towards that which awaits us beyond our loss. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen.